My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Go Cloud Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I'm here today to help you build your technology career. Maybe when I become a cloud architect, or you desire to become a security architect, or an AI architect, or an enterprise architect, or a network architect, well, I'm here to guide you along the way. I've been an enterprise architect now for a little over 25 years. I transitioned from a healthcare career to a technology career 25 years ago, and I've spent 2 decades helping people just like you getting your first tech job, getting promoted to tech. And you can find people I've worked with at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Accenture, Microsoft, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, PNC Bank, places like Zscaler, Netspoke, and Palo Alto Networks. And I want you to have the same great success, because I remember what it was like when I started 25 years ago and I didn't know where to go. And there were a whole bunch of people that I was learning with, and they all were going in all kinds of ridiculous directions because they didn't know where to go. And I want to save you from all those mistakes, and I want to help you build your architect career or whatever other career that is. So bring us your questions so we can help you. While I wait for you to bring in your architect career questions, whether it be cloud architect career questions or security architect career questions or enterprise architect career questions, I wanted to let you know some free things that we actually have going on for you. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we are going to have a How to Become an Enterprise Architect webinar. This is one of my favorite roles in my last 25 years of a cloud architect, network architect, security, enterprise architect. And this role, I absolutely love it, like all architecture roles. And we're going to talk tomorrow about what is an enterprise architect, why it's such a great career, why it's one of these careers that can never be replaced by AI, why it's the highest paying tech jobs, and why it's one of the hardest jobs for employers to find because there's zero supply of them, which makes it one of the best long-term careers. And we're going to go over this. What does an enterprise architect do? The skills. And on this webinar, you can ask me any career questions you want about anything, and it's live on Zoom, and I'll do anything I can to help you. So register. Please join us on the free enterprise architecture webinar tomorrow. Now, if you have a desire to be a cloud architect, if you have a desire to be an enterprise architect, win the interview, we've got a lot of free resources in the description of this video. So go check them out, because I want you to be successful in your career. And that's why my team made so many free resources, including 975 videos so far, mostly dedicated to architecture careers. So go check some of this out on our YouTube channel. At this point, I just wanted to say that we are experiencing still our summer savings with 50% off all products and services we offer. So take advantage of that while that lasts. Now, at this point, bring me your questions. Chris, I think I see the first question. Do not be shy. I have to leave a little early today, so please don't be shy. Get your questions in early. Chris, bring me the first question. Adam123. Hi, Mike. What does a cloud architect do day to day? What a great question. And this is something that people confuse all the time. So let's talk about what we typically do as a cloud architect during the course of our day. A lot of our time will be spent managing stakeholders. In fact, most architects consider this to be the most critical part of the job and the most critical skill for the architect. I'm not completely sold here on this. I think it's communication skills, but the first part of it is managing stakeholders. So that means we will be speaking with the client's executives, potentially from the C-suite. Potentially, we're presenting to the board at some point. We will be speaking to business leaders in various components of the actual organization. We will be finding the various needs and requirements of various components of the business. We will be getting their information. We will be trying to take their goals and create a strategy around it. So the stakeholder management piece is probably 30% of the job. So if you can think about an 8-hour day, you spend 20 to 30% of it interacting with various clients, various stakeholders, various vendors that are going to be part of the architecture, a good 3 hours of the day. Now, in an architecture role, the reality is they're going to be giving you problems, and you're going to have to come up with a strategic solution to that. Now, that means building a team, but also doing a lot of research. So for the most part, in an enterprise architect, cloud architect, security architect day, you're going to be spending 1 to 2 hours doing research where you're going to be learning things. And that could be, doing some vendor training. That could be reading materials on certain things. That could be looking up at specifications. So for example, I'd say probably 2 hours. So we've already accomplished about 5 hours of our day. Now, what we'll also be doing is we'll be leading architecture meetings, which means we'll be having meetings with the technical team, for example. You might be having an architect team of 15 to 50 that reports to you. So you'll be leading meetings and facilitating meetings. In these meetings, you're going to work on that end-to-end cloud architecture. So for example, you'll have a security architect focused on various security components and an IAM architect focused on IAM components and an AI architect focused on an AI component and some data scientists focusing on some of that as well. At the same time, you'll have application architects, you'll have network architects, and you'll have voice and video architects that are going to be part of your team, and potentially some technical experts, some engineers that will also be part of your team. So you're going to have to lead that team to kind of create that strategy. Now, that's typically another 1 to 2 hours per day. And I would spend, say, entertaining clients, for example, taking a client to lunch, dinner, or drinks is something you might do in the course of your day. So that could be a typical day. Another day might be performing an executive briefing where you're giving a presentation to a group of executives, presenting to an audience at the client or a group of stakeholders. And that could be a couple hours. You could be spending some other time creating what you call architectural artifacts or architecture documents throughout the day, which is a big component of what we do as any kind of an architect. But it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of meeting people. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of bringing teams together. It's a lot of creating strategies. It's a lot of presentations, a little bit of sales in there, exercising influence. And that's the course of our day. And that's the reason people really have trouble. And the reason people really have trouble is, they're studying on how-to things, when really what we're looking for is people that can strategize. They can weigh one trade-off against another, realize there's no solution that's absolutely perfect. So given the solution A does this 1, 2, and 3 things good, but 5 and 6 it does terribly, and solution B is good at things 2, 3, and 4, but horrible at 1, we can then determine which is going to be best for our business. So Adam 1, 2, 3, that's about the way we spend our day: meeting, communicating, leading, facilitating. Anything we can do to create what you would call a competitive advantage for our clients. Great question, Adam. Please feel free to ask more. Chris, let's bring in the next one. Security Plus or AZ500. So S. Fisher, I'm going to give you a big favor. If you finish the Security Plus, you know what you'll have to do? Learn security when you're done, because it will cover about 2% of what you need. If you do the AZ5000, guess what? You will still have to learn nearly everything that you need. And the Security Plus and these levels are what I actually call pre-training, in that they're not going to give you any of the skills that you would ever need for a real job. And what they're going to do is give you the fundamentals to actually take the training. Now, the reality is, do you need the fundamentals to take the training? The answer is no. Just take the training in the beginning. You don't have to go to pre-nursing school to actually take nursing to only learn how to be a physician. To be a physician, you go to whatever the pre-med is and then the med. So let's not worry about that. Let's focus on what you actually need. So the big question I have is, what is your goal? Because let me tell you the difference between what you will need from, today, a job as a security engineer versus what's actually being taught in that. So you'll understand. Now let's also talk about what you would need as a security architect by comparison versus what's taught in this program. So when you take something like a Security Plus or one of these Azure Certified Engineer Associates, what you're really learning is the name of stuff. So with the Azure test, it'll be what Azure calls their stuff. Marketing names. And you know what else it'll teach you how to do? How to configure those little things. Now, the Security Plus does a little better job. It teaches you a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I mean such a little bit, nobody's going to pay you for it. But as a rule, but it's such a little bit, and it's an intro to the fundamentals of security. A little bit of an intro to network security, a little bit of application security, a little bit. It's a taste. So when you're done these, you'll have a taste of knowledge on security and know marketing names and how to configure. That's assuming you did both. Now, what do I really need someone to do? Now, if it's an engineer, I need you to be able to know why you're probably not going to be using that stuff that you learned in the AZ500, that you're probably going to need much more industrial systems, maybe an industrial grade SIEM and source system, for example, and not what you're being taught in there. Maybe some more industrial grade heavy duty context I am aware strategies, which you're not going to learn in there. You're going to need to know what goes into demilitarized zones, and how do you layer that, and how do you protect the organization, and how do you protect that organization from risk. So basically, when you're done that, you won't even know where to begin. So if it's an engineer that I need someone to be a master of their domain. So a master of network security. Now, if it's a network security engineer that I have, I expect them to understand, things they can do on routers, queuing, rate limiting, that kind of thing to protect the thing. I expect that person to be an expert on the various micro-segmentation strategies in network security, things like VLANs, private VLANs, ACLs, firewall type rules, IDS, IPS systems, not only how to configure, but what they are, the strengths and weaknesses, the options, and then how to plan it as an engineer, and how to build it as an engineer, and how to troubleshoot it. And most of that gear won't be in either one of those things. So for that engineer, I need deep domain expertise, because the engineering is not just how do you configure it like they would teach you here. It's should you configure it? Should you not configure it? If you use it, what are the problems that you get? And in order for that, the problem is you're not going to be in a position to do that. So, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So that's a big part of what's missing for that. Now, let's say you wanted to be a security architect. Now, let's talk about what we do. And I've trained many people where the security architect is their first job. Now, as the security architect, you're going to have to meet with clients. As the security architect, you're going to have to create a security policy. As the security architect, you're going to have to create incident response procedures. As the security architect, you're going to learn how to calculate risk, identify assets, identify the risk to those assets, the weaknesses in the system, say vulnerabilities, the threats against them that could occur, and what would happen if something is exploited. So at that point, we can make a determination. Do we transfer the risk to an insurance company, mitigate the risk with a technical control? Do we use an administrative control? Do we use a compensating control, a corrective control? So that's part of what we're doing from a risk management perspective as an architect. I'm going to tell you why I love the security architect job best, and I'm going to invite you to my security architect webinar, the next one, which is probably next week. But let's talk about that. So the next thing we might be doing is creating a network security strategy. Now, the things that we go beyond that, we might be creating an application security strategy, disaster recovery planning, a business continuity planning. So we're creating risk registers. We're developing incident response procedures as architects. We're designing various components of the architecture. Do we go role-based access control, context aware IAM? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Do we scan a retina? Do we scan the iris? Do we scan a fingerprint? What are the strengths and weaknesses of those? So that's what a security role. Now, this role pays far more than those other roles. And why is it? Because it takes the development of skills like executive skills, presentation skills, sales skills, the ability to exercise influence, present, what have you. And it takes design and strategy skills. So that's where I'm really looking for. Now, I want you to get that, and that's what it's going to take to be hired, because the reality is I don't need a hobbyist. I don't need someone that's got 5 certifications but doesn't have any skills. There's no reason for me to pay them. Now, what changed, S. Fisher, for that to occur? Now, I used to need a lot of technicians, and that's what these things create as technicians. And why did I need so many technicians? Because if we go back to the classic data center, I have to order stuff. Somebody has to take it out of the box, rack it on the servers, connect it to power, plug it into the network, install the hypervisors, install the operating system, what have you. I don't need that anymore in cloud computing. And the reason I don't need it is one DevOps engineer can replace 50 of those people doing that, which is why those little hands-on things kind of went away, which is what companies are laying off for, because the other side of what's going on with these little hands-on things, I can train AI to write code. I can train AI to configure a firewall. I can train the AI to do the stuff. But AI can't design it. AI can't determine what the organization's risks are and convince the CISO to go spend 10, 20, $30 million on the management of the risks. AI can't go to the key stakeholders and find what's critical to the business and strategic to the business versus what's cutting off the business. And because of that, those jobs cannot be replaced by AI. So if we think about it, if I really strongly encourage people to get AI-proof skills, I've been in the strategic outsourcing business for years. I know which employers are replacing which jobs. So then if we start looking at what's taught in the name of a service and how to configure it, AI is doing it. And if it's not AI, it's going to be offshore to the cheapest part of the entire world. Let's look at what the World Economic Forum says as big skills for the future. It's AI and big data. It's technological literacy, it's creative thinking, it's curiosity and lifelong learning, it's talent management, it's systems thinking, it's leadership and influence, and it's analytical thinking. I highly recommend you read the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, which what we do as tech career strategists. And when you look at that, you see that every one of those skills, creatively solving a business problem, creatively solving a security challenge, understanding the impact of an opening in a firewall rule and what could that do to the rest of the organization's environment. Being able to think of how do you lead a team, bring out the best in your architecture team. The ability to guide the stakeholders into spending whatever money they need and investing where they need to, and showing them that if they, even though this is the shiny object in front of them, they need to invest in something else. Motivating a team, AI, big data, which we're obviously securing as security architects. Understand those are the real skills. Those are the skills that we hire for. Those are the skills that we pay for. So I want you to understand that. And because of that, I'd love you to come and think about this. So it's not if you should get a certification, if you should do it. Here's what I want you to do. The first thing is pick out the security career you really want. And when we know exactly what your target is, then we can exactly talk about the skills for your job, because learning the skills for a physician is of no value if you want to be an attorney. And if I tell you that in 61% of cases, people actually fail an architect interview because they studied for the wrong career. And after interviewing 6,000 people in the last 25 years, I see it all day, every day. So I'd suggest figuring out what you want. Well, first, come back, ask me questions, and I'll guide you. And I'm happy to ask you more questions. And by the way, why don't you join me on the Security Architect webinar that we run? Tomorrow we run an Enterprise Architect webinar. Feel free to join me on that as well. Ask me questions. It'll be on Zoom. You can ask me anything, and I'll do anything I can. You want me to see if you're ready for a job? I'll give you a quick interview on there. If you want to see if your resume looks okay, send it to me, and I'll evaluate it on there. Anything we do after we talk about the architecture roles that we can help you in your career, we do in these free webinars, and they're very important to me because it gives us a chance to start out there. So I kind of hope that helps. Chris, let's bring in the next question. And when somebody told me that if I'm going to use YouTube, I should ask people to like and subscribe videos. So I just want to go out there and help you. But if you're having a good time, like, subscribe, that kind of thing. Hi, Mike. Do cloud architects lose their job if they're not selling? So let's talk about why you can't be an architect if you can't sell or exercise influence. So let's pretend, TAW 3000, you're now a security architect. An organization has a security risk. Fine, you can be the cloud architect. I don't care. But you and the security team in your architecture have noticed the organization has an $80 million security exposure to risk. Now, that organization only has $40 million of capital that they even have access to. Now, if you can't sell that organization to mitigating that $80 million in risk, they're out of business. So if you can't sell, you're a horrible architect, because the reality is you can't convince people to do what they actually need. So it's not that you have to sell. I don't want to make it sound like car sales, but you have to be able to influence executives into doing what they think. Let's take it out of cloud architects and let's talk about a physician. So many of you didn't know I was a nurse practitioner. I had my own internal medicine office for a long period of time. Now, at one point, I had a patient that had a very dangerous heart rhythm, the kind of heart rhythm that would have caused her to have a lethal stroke within the next 12 months, statistically speaking, at an 80% probability. Now, in order to keep her from dying, I had to convince her to take a drug called warfarin, which is also used as rat poison, but it's also used in medicine to prevent AFib from turning into strokes. But, at the time, I didn't have I couldn't sell the patient into taking it. And I knew that patient was going to die, so I had to find a senior physician. And he came in and he said, Mike, you got to learn to sell. He handed me the Dale Carnegie book at the time, and he said, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he said, if you can't sell, you'll be the worst doctor in America. You need to learn to sell, because if you can't convince a patient to follow your advice, lose weight, stop smoking, exercise, take their medications, your patients will die. So that's how critical sales is. So now let's look at a cloud architect role. All of a sudden, you're now the chief architect, and you've noticed that there's an opportunity to use AI to increase that organization's revenue by 32%. Now, you know it, but you can't convince the CIO and the CFO and the CEO to spend money on it. You know what happens to your AI architecture project? It dies. Nothing happens because you couldn't convince the executive. Now, all of a sudden, you're working at Cisco as a solutions architect, or AWS as a solutions architect, or Azure solutions architect, and you notice the customer has a real problem, but you can't convince them to fix it. A week later, they get hacked and they go out of business. So I want you to understand that architecture is an executive role. It is a consulting role. It is a strategic role. And if a lawyer can't negotiate, and if a doctor can't convince their patients to take their medication, and if an architect can't convince the executives to spend money, to invest the resources to examine something, to invest the resources into a new project to make it come to real life, to invest in spending in the technology that's necessary to get them to the next level, at the end of the day, they've got nothing. So I like to say the architect is to design something, present it back to the key executives, and sell it to them. Now, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's understanding stakeholder needs. There's mapping out business requirements. But that's how critical. Now, TAA 3000, I want to take it to another step. Now, if you go on an interview for an architect, I want you to realize that, let's say it's a principal architect role. I was a principal architect in less than 2 years, and anybody that's properly trained that knows all the right skills could be as well. Now, the principal architect job is about $350,000 to $400,000, but the range is $300,000 to $500,000. The principal architect that can sell themselves to the hiring manager is getting a $500,000 offer. The principal architect that's got great skills, but they're a little weak on sales, is going to earn $300,000 a year. So just that difference in sales could be $200,000 plus a year in your architect pay. Would you be willing to risk $200,000 to not learn sales? I wouldn't be. So could you get away with it? I don't know. For a technical architect role, yes. For a design engineer role, yes. But even there, you're going to be very limited. Even a physician needs to learn to sell. A lawyer needs to convince their client to adopt a better settlement, for example, as opposed to risking and losing everything. So sales are really important. Chris, we can bring in the next one. Okay. Mustafa, how can someone who could not afford $300 to $350 a month join our program? Well, as it turns out right now, with 50% off, our program cost is $237 a month for 6 months. And for people that went to the non-live option, it's $169 a month for 3 months. But, here's the reality. It's sometimes in our life, if we want to get ahead, we have to invest in ourselves. My education was $300,000 to be able to do what I do and teach what I do. I don't regret that for a second. I didn't have any of it. I took a lot of loans and I paid those loans off very, very quickly because I had the higher salary and the earnings to do it, but I did. I invested $300,000. That's what my total education cost. And I'm thankful for it because it changed my life. It quadrupled. Well, actually, if we were really thinking where I went from a paramedic and I was earning about $400 a week to by the time I was a principal architect with less than 2 years, I was earning $4,000 a week, which 10x my salary. Now, that was pretty easy to pay those student loans back. But for us, what I've done is we basically charge our costs because we try to make it as cheap as we can while still offering a premium Mercedes type service. But I can't make it any cheaper than that. I wish I could, but we're focused on developing the best architects, creating the best leaders. And how do we do it? We have people like David Lithicum on our team that teaches many courses. He's got 35 years as an architect, seen the things that no one else has. I've got 25 years plus as an architect. We've got PhD business school professors. We've got working architects, working zero trust architects, and it takes a lot to put those courses together. We're not like the competition where they got certified, couldn't get a job, and they created a training program. I see it every day. We're doing something special, but that's the best we are able to do because we truly do care. And that's why we chose a price that was more for international students than U.S. students. But I know what you're going through. I know how hard it was for myself. I literally worked 80 hours a week and as a paramedic to even go to school for college. So I get it, and I still took loans. I truly do understand it. That's why I created this program to raise people's salaries. And I've got examples of people like who came to us with a $150,000 salary and left with a $409,000 salary at Google. I have a lot of engineers that came to us with a $140,000 job and left with a $300,000 job. And that's the best return on investment I've ever seen. People that were mental health techs that got a $120,000 plus raise as they got their first tech job. Those kind of things I can deliver all day long. And that's what I try to do. And that's what we focus on that. But I appreciate the question, and that's the honest answer. Chris, let's go to the next one. You have an AB SOAR, but you're blown away by job posting requirements. So S. Fisher, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why these job descriptions are so goofy and why the reality is they don't really have anything to do with the tech jobs in general. Now, this is the most crazy thing. I've never seen this in my life until I came to tech. You know, I come from medicine. The physician wants to hire someone. What does the physician do? The physician writes a job description for another physician. Because if I want to hire a neurosurgeon, another physician needs to know what that neurosurgeon requires. So how does it work in tech? How do these job descriptions get written? Well, it's honestly the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It's such a cartoon that I had Alonzo from my team with great graphic skills actually visually represent it. So let me kind of show you and walk you through the process. So here's what the reality is. I decide I'm going to hire a security architect. I'm the manager. I know what I need. So I create to determine I need a security architect. So what do? I go to our goofy HR systems. I issue a requisition to hire an architect. Now, a couple things happen. It takes a month or so for this to get approved, whatever. It could take a little while. But once I say I want the architect, it goes to the HR person. Now, the HR person is great. They have lots of knowledge in hiring. They have lots of knowledge in firing. They have lots of knowledge in pay and benefits. But do you know what the HR person doesn't know? Anything about what you do in your tech job. Now, how bad is it? What if I asked you to write a job description for a cardiothoracic surgeon? How many of you would be able to do that? If you're not a cardiothoracic surgeon, I promise you won't. So the key is that's why in medicine, the surgeons write the job descriptions, but not in tech. I say I want to hire someone, and then the HR person writes a job description about a job they know absolutely nothing about. Now, because the HR person knows nothing about the job they're hiring for, what do? They start Googling and looking at other job descriptions, but who wrote the other job descriptions? Other HR people that don't even know what the job is either. So by the time you get to here and you actually see the job description, you need Olympic gold medals, you need 400 years experience and things that didn't even exist because the job descriptions are all garbage in tech. I mean, they're all garbage. I've only seen 2 to 3 in my entire life that were good. And they came, well, I've seen some good ones from IBM and I've seen some good ones from Cisco, but for the most part, they're pretty terrible out there. So that's why these job descriptions are so crazy. Now, I want you to understand that. So I don't need you to have all the skills in a job description. What I need you to have is the real skills for the job. Now, I've never been on an interview where I didn't get an offer. Never. And in most cases, or I should say in 2 out of the 5 jobs I've actually accepted, I got a better job than the one I actually interviewed for because I impressed them on the interview. So there is that. But, the key is I had all of the skills the hiring managers wanted, and I had perfected those skills, but I had none of the skills that they didn't. And that's one of people's biggest challenges, S. Fisher, is they learn all the other skills based on somebody's job description, which are skills coming from a different career. So that's why I have this architecture webinar, and I run it once a week. And I'll talk about other careers if you want. I'm happy to go into detail about anything. I've interviewed 6,000 people. I've tried to hire for decades. I know why we hire. I know why we don't hire. I know why people fail the interview. I know which ones are going to win, and I know how to get you there too. So join us on that free webinar. And that'll explain some of those things. And I hope that explains why the job description, realistically speaking, is kind of worthless. So we need to figure out and read between the lines what the actual job is. And that's why we use recruiters and do a whole lot of things to sidestep the normal hiring process. You can learn more on our webinar. Please feel free, if you guys have some questions and gals have some questions, ask, because I really want to help out and do anything I can to help you build your career. Can't stay late. Gonna have to leave a little early today, so get your questions in early. Chris, we can bring in the next question. Hi, Mike. Do you think designing a company's SEO strategy is part of the architecture? For SEO specialists, but not for a cloud architecture, no. Now, what we could be doing, so if, for example, we actually have a e-commerce organization, what are we really looking for when we design an e-commerce organization? Lots of different things. The first thing we have to think about is, do we have the infrastructure to support it? The servers at the right capacity, the network performance. So do we have the infrastructure? Then we have to think about the strategy of how do we secure it. For example, with a customer that's going to be an e-commerce provider, we're not going to use traditional IAM. We're going to use traditional IAM for the internal employees, but we might need a customer IAM to deal with all the customers and their accounts that we're managing in the system. And it's a different kind of strategy behind that. Now, we also are going to have to think about the user experience of the users. How is the user going to interact with the platform? Is it going to be a good experience? Now, we also have to learn, and how do we improve the performance of it? How do we reduce latency? Again, user experience. How do we reduce the number of clicks? How do we create the content? Ultimately, would be part of somebody, but not us, that's going to make people want to stay on the page. That's going to be there long term. Now, part of that, if we're dealing with the business architecture, like part of an enterprise architecture, not necessarily, say, a security architecture, but say an enterprise architecture, we're going to have a branding strategy. We're going to have a marketing strategy. We're going to have to try to optimize the process for a customer to get on the site, spend more time on the site, and then we might be thinking of ways can we do it. Could we create an AI recommendation engine? Should that organization invest in more SEO, or does SEO not even matter? Should they be investing in, say, RAG optimization versus SEO optimization based upon how people are thinking? Should that organization not waste its time on SEO? Should they invest in the enterprise architecture perspective more in ads and other means to get clients to the site? So the whether or not depends, and SEO strategy is really kind of questionable at this point when we start thinking about AI and other forms of things that are going out there. But then we will probably think at an enterprise architecture, or how we promoting that site, or we're developing any partnerships. And if we are developing partnerships, how do we create the connectivity to the partnerships that we might have? How do we secure the connectivity that we may have? Now, what's going to go into securing this? What's going to go into the endpoint security, for example, the devices, the servers themselves? Are we moving, what packages are being removed, for example, would be part of its architecture? How is it hardened? What types of endpoint protection is going to be on there? But it all goes together as part of the architecture. The architecture is big picture. So I guess you could consider, SEO as one of the marketing options that someone would consider, but not really something we talk about in a cloud architecture or most enterprise architectures. We're really focusing on the people in that organization. Do the employees have the best tools? What tools would it make the employee's job better? And what technologies would support a better experience? How can we get that organization from its current goals to its goals in the future? What is going to be necessary? Okay, they want to buy a new business. What's going to be more necessary to do that? What's going to be required to harmonize the systems, deal with overlapping IP addresses, deal with the security complexities, deal with redundancies among the systems? That's more of architecture that we're thinking of. Architecture is more about we're designing a new system. How do we get the users to want to adopt it? What does it take to get the stakeholders to support it? What does it take to get the stakeholder buy-in? What kind of marketing collateral are we kind of creating? So these are much more architect things. Once we start thinking of SEO, it really falls much more under engineering kind of things. Now, when we think of a marketing campaign and the marketing executives, and of course, marketing will be a key stakeholder we speak to, they will be developing the strategy to determine where we've got option one. Option one is SEO. Option two is RAG optimization. Option three is social media optimization. Option four is paid traffic. And then they're going to look at, okay, what do we think is going on with SEO in the future? Is too much of the search going to go AI? Does that mean more RAG? Do we do this? Do we do this? So when you start thinking about planning things, these are the things that I want you to think about. So I guess at some point it could be, but not realistically speaking, things we typically talk about as part of a cloud architecture or enterprise architecture. But I like the question and I like where it's thinking. Good question, Ark. And please, if you've got questions, please bring some in. What books would I recommend for someone who's interested in becoming a cloud architect? You have a background in analytics, BI, and sales. I don't think you're going to be able to learn all of architecture from a book. Now, Chris and my team, I wrote a list of the 20 best books that I found for the architect. And that is, there's a one for the tech books and one for the business books. And I definitely want to send them both to you here. So Chris from my team will do it, but it all depends. Now, if you've been a management consultant, and that means you've been walking into the client, meeting with the executive sponsors, meeting the C-suite, finding out the C-suite's needs, being able to then, from the C-suite, determine who the key stakeholders are across the organization. And then at that point, creating a strategy and managing those stakeholders and managing vendors, knowing how to convince people to spend $500 million on something, then you probably are already halfway there and you might not need training. But if what your background is in analytics, it might not be there. Now, when you say sales, if your background is, as say, a global account manager for a tech company, you're going to be beautiful. But otherwise, you're probably going to need to be taught. And here's what I mean by that. So there's some jobs that you can learn on the job. I can learn how to play with Linux on my own. I can't learn to fly my airplane by myself because I'm somehow managed to get the airplane off the ground. If I can't land it, I die. Now, you can't learn medicine, and I come from a medicine background. You can't figure out how to do surgery by watching a YouTube video. But if someone does it, shows you, is with you, teaches you all the anatomy, all the vessels that you might have to deal with, the proper procedures, and tests you on the procedures, then it can be very safe and you can save a lot of lives. Same thing for architecture. Most people don't know how to walk into an organization, how to find the executives' pain points, their goals, their vision, their strategy, map out the key processes, map out the key value streams, map out whatever is necessary from the business architecture perspective, find weaknesses in that business architecture, make recommendations to that business architecture, then be able to create a team and lead a team of 15 to 50 people to examine the organization's technology. And then take another team of 15 to 50 people to design a strategy to get them to a future state. Be able to take that future state, lead that team, bring that architecture out of the team, create all the architecture artifacts, go back to the clients, executives, and stakeholders, present it, get their feedback, And you know how to create a change management structure and a governance structure and all these other things, then you're there. If you're not going to learn these out of a book. I read 3,000 books in my architecture career, but I also have a $300,000 education where I was taught how to do these things. So keep that in the back of your mind. Why don't you join us in the architecture webinar? And that way, what we can do is the following. I can assess you. I can see what you have. I can see where your gaps are. And I can tell you, is it just reading a couple of books? And I'll tell you, I've had some people that I've said, just read a couple of books because they're already there. And then I've had other people where I start probing them and asking the architecture questions, and it becomes very clear they don't even know what architecture is, and we have to begin through proper training. So that's what I would suggest doing. But really, to be a cloud architect, what you'll also have to understand is the network and the data center. And why that actually is. So you have 4 compute options that you can use on the cloud. So you've got a virtual machine, you've got a container, you've got application virtualization, you've got function as a service. But you also have those same ones. And after we go through those same ones, then it's a matter of determining which the strength of one, which is the weakness of the other one, what are the trade-offs with each other. And that's really what we're going to get you to do. So why don't you join me on the next, we have an enterprise architect webinar tomorrow. Just join us on that. I'll cover the enterprise architect role, which is very similar to the cloud architect role. It's just a little more business executive role, typically pays a little more, typically a little closer to the C-suite, and typically easier to get into if you don't have a technical background. And it's a bigger role anyway. In fact, 50% of working enterprise architects didn't come from a tech background in the first place. They were just trained in enterprise architecture. And I know plenty of people like that. And I've trained many people. For example, Wallace was a sales rep, now working at JP Morgan Chase as an enterprise architect. Jermaine was a sales rep selling landscaping, now working as an enterprise architect. So I can give you lots of examples like that. But that way I can assess you, test you, and give you the full set of the skills, because I just really do want to help. But my team also did bring the 20 best books that you can see in the chat box. They're book recommendations on my favorite 10 best tech books and my favorite 10 best business books that help with architecture careers. And I encourage you to read that too. And then I know it's out of place, but I want to get to S. Fisher's question because it's probably the most scary thing that I see in tech, and it's the hugest mistake people make. So, Chris, can we go slightly out of order and go to the after we get certified question? So, S. Fisher, after you get certified, what entry-level titles should you search for? None. You'll be able to do nothing after a certification. So I want to talk about the difference between certification and actually training. And I'll tell you, probably 90% of the people that have come to me that I've retrained that are now working at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, they came to me with like 10 certifications. But let's talk about the difference. So here's the first phase. You have to learn the job. So when I train an airline pilot, before they get their license, I teach them how to fly. So by the time they get their certification, they're ready. Now, when I train a physician, by the time we get a license or they're certified, they spend 6-8 years in school. They're ready. So S. Fisher, here's the thing I want you to understand. You and your skills are the ultimate gift. You are the ultimate thing that can provide a service. And the greater the value of the service you can do, the greater your pay. So what I want you to think of a certification is this. Imagine you have a box and you put a really good gift in the box. And then because maybe it was, for example, I just had a 29th wedding anniversary for my wife. And of course, inside I had a box, which was a really nice gift for her, which, she put up with me for 29 years, which is really great. We're still married and we love each other. So that to me is a big, exciting thing. So anyway, inside that box, I put a really good gift. Now, what I did is because I can't wrap anything, it looks like garbage. I had the store professionally wrap it and put a beautiful bow on it. Now, the beautiful bow is what I consider a certification. It's going to make people interview you, but 97% of the time, 98% of the time, if all you have is a certification, you'll never get hired. That's the reality because you have to have the skills. So, for example, there's some certifications I tell people just not to do, like the Security Plus, because it's the level of knowledge that's going to come out of that won't be enough for any job. Now, I start people with the CISSP. To me, that's my favorite intro to security. And why is it? Because 46% of job postings actually ask for it anyway. So that's a pretty big thing. But more importantly, it's about 10 times harder than a Security Plus. So at least with that way, you might have 20% of the skills you need. But no, that's only 20% of the knowledge coming out of a certification. So the key is you have to get the skills first. And to that, we have to know exactly what the job is. Because I'm going to tell you, if you got 50 certifications, you still wouldn't have the ability to get a job. Because the certification is branding. You take an AWS certification and they teach you the name of an EC2 instance. Now, they don't tell you that EC2 instance is a virtual machine. They don't tell you how you would size that virtual machine, how much DRAM you would need, how many cores you would need. You wouldn't know how to size the compute infrastructure for, say, AI versus high throughput, high performance. They don't teach any of that. They won't teach anything related to that. All they'll tell you is the name of something and how to click a few boxes. Now, AI is clicking the few boxes right now in terms of infrastructure as code. And I don't need anybody on my team that knows vocabulary. Now, I do need someone on my team that can say, Mike, this workload shouldn't run on a virtual machine. This workload would probably be more efficient on a container. Now, because of the way the workload is, it's a fairly light workload. We don't need an additional operating system. This doesn't quite need the harder core perimeters of security that a virtual machine would do. We can get away with a container. The container will be 26% more efficient given for this, and we think it'll increase scalability, what have you. That's something I care about. Mike, we're thinking of this function as a service to remediate. Somebody pops something in an object storage bucket with the wrong permissions, and because in cloud computing, it's connected to the internet. So we created a serverless function that'll function in an event-driven approach that at some point will remediate a problem. That's what I care. But none of that will be taught in the certifications. All you're going to learn is the name of something and how to configure it. Here's what's worse that comes out of certifications. So imagine a physician that only knew how to prescribe one pharmaceuticals one provider's drugs, like say Pfizer. So that physician is limited on the menu to whatever Pfizer offers. Now, unfortunately, Pfizer doesn't make the best drug for everything in the world. They make some great medications, and I prescribed lots of them in my career, but they don't make everything. So if I was limited to just Pfizer drugs, my patients would not be doing well. Now, the doctor will prescribe drugs from Pfizer and from Merck and from Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson and everything. And the doctor will prescribe surgical techniques that can be taught around the world. So when you go do a certification, what they actually teach you is the one thing. So let's say you do an AWS certification like the Solutions Architect Professional, and you think you figured it out, right? And you do the AWS security thing, and they're going to teach you how to use the AWS security stuff. Guess what? 98% of our enterprises are multi-cloud, so you can't use most of the AWS security stuff. Anyway, now the question is, would you use the AWS security stuff? And you look at, say, AWS WAF and say that has signature protection, which means it can protect against an attack if you pay extra that it's seen before. And then you look at the Palo Alto network firewall or the Fortinet or the Cisco firewall, and not only can do what exactly everything that AWS firewall can do, but it has AI in it. When Sally's doing something funny, the AI is going to stop Sally in her tracks. So you need to know when not to use the cloud provider stuff. Now, at least 60% of the things taught in an AWS, and Azure, or a Google certification you won't be able to use because they won't work in multi-cloud. So when we hire people, we're looking for people that have the skills, they have the judgment, and none of that is taught in a certification. So you've got to get the training first. You've got to develop the skills for the career first, and then only after that do you get certified. Because all certification is a pretty bow on the box that says you passed a certification. But I've interviewed 6,000 people. Of the people that didn't learn their skills that were certified and had lots of certification, I was able to hire less than 20 of those people. So I want you to go there and see it. And that's what I want, because I want you to have such a great job. It's funny, my friend Mitch Fisher is one of my friends for the longest period of time, and I know a lot of Fishers, so seeing your name pop in is really good to see. But I really hope that makes sense. So what do? If you want to go to Greece, for example, you determine how to get there, right? You want to Greece, then you look at the flight pass, and you've got one that goes from, say, Atlanta to London and London to Greece. You take that path. Or if you live in London already, you go straight to Greece. Or if you live, say, on the West Coast, you might have to go from San Francisco to New York to London, for example, to Greece. So it's more of that. So first we want to figure out where you're going. Please come to the webinar tomorrow. I really want to meet you. I really, really want to help you, because I want to make sure we get you going in the right direction, because I hate to see you really struggle. For example, the average security architect earns $229 a year, which is basically $900 a day. And same thing for an enterprise architect or for cloud architect as a rule. I don't want to see you spend a year or two learning to get certified and then still having zero skills and then having to learn the skills afterwards. Here's the thing. When you learn the skills, the certifications are silly easy. Silly easy. Chris, let's bring in the next one. Sorry, I went out of order. That's just something so important for most people. And it's the biggest mistake we see as employers when we're hiring: certifications, but no skills. You would love if we had more segments about using the skills to work for yourself as a freelancer, how to find companies, for example. So here's why I don't create a lot of content around that. If somebody plans out their security career fairly well, their cloud architect career fairly well, their AI architect career fairly well, I'll give you my example. So I was a nurse practitioner practicing internal medicine. Prior to that, I was a nurse. Prior to that, I was a paramedic. So I had a lot of background in healthcare. And when I went into tech, I decided that, I was going to pick something hard. I was hired as a senior engineer. 3 months later, I was promoted to a lead architect. 2 years later, I was a principal architect. Now, a principal architect at Microsoft or AWS pays between $300,000 and $500,000 a year. And to have a job that's an easy job where you've got the support of someone is pretty great. Now, I'm going to give you the reality of it here, so just so you can think about the consulting side versus the non-consulting side. So here you are, you're earning $500,000 a year. People are going to pay for your MBAs. They're going to pay for your executive coaches. And then you can move into bigger and bigger jobs. So there's one side of it. Now, understand, if you're in one of these roles that I'm talking about for a couple of years, you're going to be meeting with the C-suite of multiple organizations. You're going to be meeting with the executive leadership of multiple organizations. And 3 or 5 years in this job, you're going to have a phone that inside of your phone, I know there's just a cat on my phone, but you'll have the phone numbers of CEOs at some of the world's biggest companies, some of the world's greatest executives. And at that point, you can pick up the phone and say, do you need any help with this? Do you need any help with this? Do you need any help with this? Because you'll have it, you'll have the network, you'll have the Rolodex, as we like to call it. Now, if I had someone brand new when they want to start out consulting, I want you to understand it from the business's risk. Can I hire someone that I don't know who they are? Because if they mess up and I'm the chief information officer, I just got fired. But can I hire Accenture? Of course I can. Can I hire Deloitte, IBM, Cisco, Microsoft to come in and do it? The answer is yes. So there's a huge risk for me to actually buy consulting services from a regular person. Which means if you want to start a consulting service business, you have to have a few $1 million available for marketing, because you get your clients by spending money on them. And 1 year, I spent $100,000 on lunches and dinners for a client. I'm literally not joking, a single client. Thankfully, the company gave me a corporate American Express card, and they assumed that expected me to do so. So that was a huge client, and I'm spending $100,000 on lunches and dinners. Now, the other sales reps on the team potentially spent $500,000 that year too. So there is that, and there are those things to think about. So you're going to have a multi-million-dollar budget, because what you're going to need to have to do is create this Mercedes brand, this Porsche brand at a boutique thing. And that means $100,000 websites. And that means, you're not going to a single meeting without an Armani suit on. And you might be bringing an entourage of people to make you look bigger, because you're going to have to prove that. Now, if you work as an architect for an IBM or a Microsoft for 5 years, now you've got the brand, you've got the stamp, and now people are willing to come to you and they will call you every day. Now, here's the other side of why I don't typically go there. If you're an architect with 5 years experience working for Cisco and you've dealt with billion-dollar budgets and you know how to run these things, you now have almost CEO level skills. And why is that? Because you're building a business for the C-suite across the world. You have to influence the C-suite, a bank, to invest money in this, because it's going to make their business better, which means you have to develop the business acumen, the leadership of an MBA plus, which is what we teach, obviously, in our training programs, because you have to have that. And all of that is what you can do. Now, if I take someone and they start their own business, here's what happens. For example, there was a cloud guy, or he called himself a cloud guy in England, and he asked me to be on his webinar to make him look legitimate about his cloud computing thing. And I said, well, let me ask you a few questions. I asked him a couple basic questions on compute. He didn't know. I asked him a couple questions on storage. He didn't know. I asked him a couple questions on databases. He didn't know. Asked him a couple questions. He had taken some mastery program taught by someone that didn't know cloud computing. And I said to him, I said, if you touch training, everybody you train won't get hired because you don't have the skills to get hired. And he said, but I'm doing it anyway. And he started his training program. So the reality is he can't help everybody. Everybody that wastes their money on this person is never going to get hired, and they're going to have to learn from scratch because he's not good enough to get hired himself. And he's now doing training. So how do you become a doctor if you've never done your residency, and what do you actually have to offer? So I like to train people to have the skills. Then I like them to master the skills, get the 10,000 hours of experience in a niche area to become an expert, and then go consult. Because that way you're consulting at $500 an hour, $800 an hour, $1,000 an hour, as opposed to not having anything to go sell yourself from, not having that pedigree. What are you going to get, $80 an hour? And what are you going to do? Spend hundreds of dollars each to get that money? So it's a lot to build a business. It's a lot to build trust. It's a lot to build credibility. It's a lot to build brand. So if you don't have the millions of dollars to spend, maybe go earn $1.5 million in the meantime, have the job, get your pedigree, have them pay for an MBA along the way. Have them give you some more executive training so that when you finally are a consultant, you have something to offer and you can truly help, and you're going to get paid like crazy for it. So that's the way I am, because I like to be excellent at everything I do, and I like to really help. So that's my suggestion. And that's why I don't typically talk about becoming freelancers, because if you're earning $500,000 a year or more, do you need to be a freelancer? So, that's why I would suggest it. And even if we look at me, my first business, I didn't start for 5 years. And I have other businesses, but the key is I had to have the skill. I had to have the knowledge. I had to know what I didn't know and know what I knew and knew how I had something to offer. So that's one of the ways that I've done that. If there's any other questions, ask them now. Otherwise, like I said, I don't have a lot of time today. So if you've got a quick question, just let me know real quick. And otherwise, so I'd like to remind everybody that tomorrow we're going to have an architecture webinar. Please join us. Please do so. And in that webinar, we'll go over the architect role, specifically enterprise architect, but you can ask me questions about any other architect career. I don't care. I'll even go over the differences, what we do in these roles. I just want to make you happy, and I want to make you hired. And I want you to have the skills to be hired. But if you don't know what the job is, you don't know what the starting point is, we don't know how to get you there. So that's something I really, really want you to come join me tomorrow. In the description of this video, there are so many free resources to help you with your architect career, cloud architect career, AI architect career, security architect career. So sign up for some. They're all free. They'll be emailed to you, and I know they will be helpful to you in some way. And if you want to join us and take advantage of our 50% off, please do so for our summer savings. They're not going to last forever. But really the key here, what I really was concerned about, is making sure we actually give you everything that you need to really be successful. Do I have some chops? Yeah, I know there's another term that I would use at home for that, but the answer is yes. The key is with these roles, we go out there, we build ourselves, we grow, and we put ourselves in a position that's fairly terrific. Okay, I see there's one more question. So, Ta 3000, have I ever had a job as an architect and realized I was not being compensated properly? No, but I will give you an example of M. M was a student of mine. He was one of my private clients before I started this. And when M came to me, I trained him. I trained him when he was in high school. I trained him when he was college. And M left me and went to NTT. He went to Cisco. He went to a lot of big prestigious companies. And I remember there was a time that M was doing such crazy things. And I remember speaking to M. And I remember when I spoke to M, I said, okay, let's write down what you're doing. Let's look at what you're doing. Let's look at the actual value of what you're doing. And let's put that in business terms and go sell it to the one of the VPs. So what we did is we looked at what he did. We looked at what he was paid. We looked at how he was being paid, reframed it in business terms, and he got nearly a 6-figure raise and $50,000 of restricted stock units. So the answer is yes. Now, I will tell you when I wasn't compensated properly, and that was in my short time. And I'll give you the examples and things what really happened and helped me. Somebody really was kind to me, and I'm thrilled for it. So when I first started out, I was a senior engineer. And that was my first tech job. And I moved into an architect job. And I went to Wall Street. And honestly, I got paid real well. Real well. And I did that for a little while. And then I found myself at a very large tech company in an architect role. And what happened is my manager said, you know, Mike, we need to talk. Was one of the first CCIEs. I had done a CISSP because everybody at Cisco had to do a CISSP. And I fell asleep in the CISSP boot camp because honestly, it put me to sleep. It was all too basic for me. And when my manager pulled me out, my manager said, Mike, can we talk? And I'm like, we can talk about anything you want. You're my manager. And he says, Mike, do you know the difference between a $150,000 solutions architect like you and a $300,000 enterprise architect? And this is going back 24, 25 years now. And all I wanted to know is, tell me, please tell me. I must have lit up like a Christmas tree because I was so excited. I was going to hear this and I was going to learn it. And my manager said, see, right now, Mike, you're a CCIE. Everybody knows you as an IP multicast expert and a BGP expert and an MPLS expert, but that's just the tip. He said, the difference between you and that $300,000 professional is the ability or the amount of results you can drive. And I said, huh? He said, right now you can make sure the network's perfect. He said, but what if you could change the business? What if you could change the revenue of the business, the net income of the business? He said, right now you're leading an architecture team of 2 or 3. What happens when you can lead an architecture time of 50 to 100 and manage the architectures you could do? My manager said, you give a good presentation, real good, but I'm not putting you in front of the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company yet. So because of that, we need to change that. That will be a huge impact on your salary. Now, my manager said I needed something called executive presence. I was like, what the heck is this? And then they told me what it was, showed me what it was, trained me in executive presence. And they told me I needed to do that. Then they told me my leadership skills weren't good enough. My sales skills needed to be better. About a year later, I had these skills and I moved into the bigger role. And that was the beginning of my tech career. That was when everything started to explode. When I realized it was not my tech abilities, it's what problems that I could solve with the tech, not what I could do with the tech, but what problems I could solve. Could I get more patients out of the hospital with less medical errors using tech? Huge thing, saves lives. Could I help an airline use AI, for example, to figure out when's the cheapest time to buy their fuel to keep airline prices down? Sure, I can. Have I worked with the bank to help them come up with trading systems that trade autonomously based on news cycles faster than people can? Of course I have, because that's what architecture is. It's how do we design a strategy to enhance our performance. So those are the kind of things that we're typically talking about. So never had this problem because I listened very carefully to that first mentor I had that said, Mike, it's not the tech. The tech is the limit. You've already maxed out the limit. It's using the tech as a tool or a vehicle to achieve change, to drive results, to change the world. When he told me that was when it was like this big light bulb. And then the more and more business acumen you have, the greater your skills are. And we focus on that so extensively because when you go to salary.com and you look at the average salary of someone with business acumen, it's between $500,000 and $700,000 a year right now. So when we marry that level of business acumen, of course, we teach heavy business acumen for that reason, with technical skills, where does that take us? Well, let me give you an example, TAW 3000, what goes into salary. I like, I'm a business executive and I love my macroeconomic supply and demand curves. So let's look at different kinds of roles. So this is going to be the demand. So this is a given demand. And the greater we move this way down, this is the greater supply. So what I want you to think about is let's look at the job, which I consider probably the worst career in tech right now for lots of reasons, and that's software development. And here's the reason why. Anybody in the entire world, everyone in the entire world was taught to code, so there's a huge supply. AI does a really good job coding. And does it matter whether my software developer is in California, where they cost me a lot of money, Cameroon, Cape Town, Cambodia, or the Cayman Islands? The answer is no. So for software development, I have the entire global world here. So this is typically speaking one of your lower paid technology positions. Now let's look at an architect role, for example. This is a how-to role. So now I need someone that doesn't just understand how to code as an architect. I need someone that understands the underlying technology, the compute, the storage, the network, the AI, all of it. Understand how it works, understand how it fits together, and how to use it for competitive advantage. So, and create a blueprint for it. So that automatically takes me to a skill here, because everybody knows how to, but not how to plan. Now, when you start adding leadership skills, you move higher, less supplies. Executive presence, you move a lot less. Business acumen. We start having negotiation skills, executive presentation skills, executive communication skills, high levels of emotional intelligence. Look what happens on that supply and demand curve. So here we have an executive architect with an $800,000 job because they have, as a chief architect, because they have so much business acumen. Now, that's the difference, realistically speaking, between an $800,000 architect and, say, a $400,000 or $500,000 architect. Is typically that level of business acumen, executive presence, emotional intelligence, that sort of thing. So when we get to more tech careers, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. As we get to an architecture career, you have to visit your clients. So maybe we're dealing with Europe as an area versus the entire world, or North America as an area versus the entire world. So it's a much smaller pool of people. But now we need executive skills and all these business and speaking and all these other skills that most technology people don't have. That's why 50% of enterprise architects actually come from non-tech jobs. And that's why at Go Cloud Careers, we focus so much on this stuff. And that's why we created executive programs. That's why we have PhD business school professors in our program. That's why me and Chris and Alonzo all hold MBAs. That's when we bring in executives on, for example, they're executives, because that's really what I want you to understand. What would be your answer when your boss has already set the trap? So Dickinson, could you tell me a little more of what you mean? What do you mean set the trap? What kind of trap? I know we had, in the chat box, asked you for more information, but there's not enough information for me to answer that. I want to help. So if there's more information, just let me know. Mohammed Sharif, knowing you're a technical guy with more than 8 years of experience and highly shaped T-shaped skills, how and what are the points you should focus on to move to the next level, and what's next for long-term between a cloud architect and an AI architect? So the question is, do you want to be a cloud architect or an AI architect? Because there's nothing next. Whichever one you pick is going to be the one you actually go to. So what I want you to understand with engineering skills is that engineering and architecture are very different. And I want you to understand that your background will help you. It will give you some things, but about 98% of the skills are different. Now, I've got lots of experience taking people. For example, Pritapal was a tech professional for 20 years. We got him a great enterprise architect job when we were done. Harsha was a cloud engineer with a decade of cloud engineering experience. We moved him into a cloud architect role, for example. And I'll give you another example. Dibia, great engineer with about 15 years experience. We turned her into an architect. Now, why did I pick them? So what I want you to understand is the architecture role is very different. So those three engineers that I talked about, we got them moved into a cloud architect role. They took about 14 months. Now I'm going to go bring it back to a different kind of candidate we had. I'm going to go to Wallace Agana or Jermaine or Yvonne, but let me just pick those two. So Wallace Agana was a global account manager. He was an executive in sales, which meant he had a lot of the architect skills already. It took me 6 months to get him hired by JP Morgan Chase. At the same time, Yvonne and Jordan, both best friends, took my training, were hired by AWS as a solutions architect as their first tech job ever. One was a waiter. I forget what the other one was doing. Their first tech job. So why did it take a little longer to get the engineers moved into an architect role versus the salespeople and other people? Engineering is a very tactical role. And because it's very tactical, it's about how to. Architecture is all about why, it's all about strategy, and it's all about business. So what you're going to have to do is learn a completely new set of skills. You're going to think from how to why. So when we start thinking about the skills, there's really going to be two sets of skills that you actually need. Let's say we're discussing a cloud architect role, and I want to do this particularly so you understand why some jobs are an easier transition, why it's easier for me to take a nurse like Camille to get her a job as a director of architecture very quickly, and where the disconnect is. So the disconnect is engineering versus architecture. In fact, what if I told you that 61% of the time people failed the interview? It's because they mixed up the difference between cloud architect skills and cloud engineering skills, or any tech. So these are the skills you're going to have to learn. And it's going to be a good set of skills. And I know you can learn them. And for example, we would teach it, but you can definitely learn it. So let's go into some of the skills you'll need. So you're going to need, in the majority of the cloud architect skills, 75% of them are actually not tech skills. So, for example, you will need to convince the client to adopt your plan. That's sales skills. You will be communicating with executives, between technology people, and you're going to have to get information very accurate. So you're going to need a strong set of communication skills. You will be giving a presentation almost every day as an architect, and the last part of an interview is a presentation. So you're going to need strong presentation skills. You're going to have to know how to write a brief for executives. For example, when you want an executive to spend $1 billion, you can't give them a 400-page document to read. You've got to knock it down to 2 pages. So after my MBA program, I had to take training in executive writing. So of course we teach this. You will have to know how to lead a team, to lead an architecture team. So you're going to have to get some training in leadership skills. Now, you'll have to have what's executive presence. Executive presence, your ability to walk in and command a room. This was before I had executive presence training. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about BGP, a routing protocol of the internet. Now, after executive presence, I learned how to command a room. You're going to have what's called CXO relevance, meaning you can be able to walk into the CFO's office and you need to be able to speak finance to them. Whether we're talking about a net present value or a payback period, for example, or a discount rate or the future value of something, we've got to be able to be there and communicate to them about how our architecture is going to make an impact on that. You will have to know how to build a business case, because while I've sold $1 billion plus architectures, 1.1 was my record. The reality is nobody woke up and said, Mike, how do you spend $1 billion plus of my money? I had to create a strategy behind it. You will have to have a large amount of business knowledge because you're creating a business strategy. And of course, those are the types of business skills that you'll need. Now, when it comes to tech skills, you're going to need understanding of networking. And it's not how to configure things. You're not going to learn it in a CCNA, but there'll be things like BGP and how do you design your routing? How do you design your IP addressing plan? What's coming in switching wise, private lines, wide area network selection, how and when to use NAT. So those are basic network stuff. Then you're going to need to understand compute. And compute is not how to configure something. Compute is knowing when to use a virtual machine and when to use a container and when to use application virtualization and when to use a function as a service, the strengths and weaknesses, how do you size them, how do you design them. Same thing for storage. How do you work around the cloud storage because it's so slow compared to data center in server storage? So you have to have a knowledge of block storage, object storage, file storage, RAID, cloud storage performance workarounds, and what to use and when and where they fit and the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Same thing about databases and business application. You'll need to know how they're designed, how they scale, what you could use, and what your tools are. You'll need to understand security and what and where to place your firewalls and IDS IP systems and Siemens source systems, for example. What kind of an IAM strategy are you going to try to use? What's going to the best interest of what kind of incident response procedures? So what it's going to be is it's going to be a completely new set of skills, and it's going to be a completely new way of thinking, which is why it generally takes engineers a little longer than someone that's not been in tech, because you have to go from doing to planning. Now, let me tell you the upside of that, Mohammed, is generally speaking, as an engineer, you've got a lot of tech skills and a lot of tech depth, and you've seen some things, and that experience is still valuable. So what we want to do is we want to teach you architecture so you can learn how all the pieces fit together and the entire thing. And then once you learn that, what's going to happen is you're going to have this magic thing go off in your head. And that magic thing is automatically going to take your past experience and tie it together. Just like when I was a kid and I was a paramedic and then I was a nurse and then I learned internal medicine. When I learned internal medicine, all those things that I never really understood all fit together. And then all of a sudden my experience is there. And let me give you the good news. When I've got someone, they've never worked in tech and we train them to be a cloud architect, their typical pay is between $150,000 and $200,000 as their first tech job. It's pretty normal. When I've got someone with 8 to 10 years in tech, we're often seeing 250 or 300 as their first architect job. So the key is, no, it's a completely different set of skills. Know that you're going to have to get some training. Know it's going to challenge the way you think. And it's going to be hard because you're used to doing, and you're going to have to go from the doing role to the planning role, which is no different than anybody that's ever had an individual contributor role or a regular worker role who's now an executive and now has to delegate and make the entire team. It's a different way of thinking, and that's going to be the hardest part. The next part is just learning the right skills. And I have an architect webinar tomorrow. So we'll go over, if you think you have some of the skills, if you want, I'll give you a quick assessment. I'll see what you have. I can guide you on what you need, and I can be very, very precision after I speak with you. Okay, well, it was so nice spending the time with you, answering questions related to cloud architect careers and security careers, enterprise architecture careers, building a business. These are one of those things that I just absolutely love doing. But we've actually run out of time. I said I didn't have a lot of time today. That's why I asked everybody to get their questions in as quickly as we possibly could. But that's okay. I'll have a free architecture webinar tomorrow. It'll be on Zoom. We can have a face-to-face conversation. I encourage you to join. Chris from my team just dropped that link into the chat box, and it is also in the description. Lots of free things in the description of this video for you to register for. They're all free. They can all add a lot of value to your career. Go get them. They're all free. Just sign up. They'll be emailed to you. And take advantage of our summer savings if you want to train with us. As always, any program you train with us, you stay on the program until you are hired. We are not a boot camp. We want to train you. We want to keep you in our program until you are hired and truly make a difference in your life. That's one of the things that we do very differently around here. So I look forward to seeing so many of you in the webinar today. If you had a good time, maybe like this video. Maybe subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to assist you in your career. Take care, everyone. It was so nice spending the day with you.